what do you sense here? You're amazing. I mean it. And maybe part of your amazingness is that you know more than you allow yourself to know. Not in a loud way, not always in a clear way. Sometimes it starts as a tiny signal, a feeling in your body, a word or a picture that appears, a silence that suddenly feels full, a sense that there is something more here. Before you know, you sense. And today I want to explore that place, the thing you know before you know. Welcome to Your Amazing, your space to pause, to calm down, reconnect to your roots, awaken your spirit, and see what truly matters. This podcast is called Your Amazing for a reason. I believe you are naturally creative, resourceful, and whole. You're not a problem to be fixed, even when life is messy, even when you feel lost. There is still wisdom in you. And today's topic is about that quiet wisdom, not certainty, not being right, but sensing. That human moment when something in you whispers, I don't know why yet, but I sense there is something here. And I think many of us have learned to move past that too quickly. We explain it away, we minimize it, we wait for proof, we wait for the full words, we wait until it makes sense. But maybe the first signal is not asking to be explained. Maybe it is asking to be welcomed. Hi, I'm Jorma, a coactive coach, and I've worked in corporate for more than 20 years. And today we are looking at one of the most human and powerful things we can do. Not abandon what we sense just because we cannot prove it yet. If you are listening on Spotify, Apple Podcasts, or YouTube, hit follow. It helps more people to find this space. Thank you so much for being here. Let's pause and look at that together. I want to share one moment that stayed with me. I was in a meeting recently, and on paper the decision made sense. Everyone around the table was nodding. The language was clean, the logic was there. It looked like alignment. But in my body, there was a quiet no. Not dramatic, just a tightening. Nothing loud enough to interrupt. Nothing I could fully explain. So I smiled, I stayed polite, and let the meeting move on. I kept thinking about that feeling. Not because I wanted to be difficult, not because I thought I was automatically right, but because something in me had noticed a mismatch before I had the words for it. A few weeks later, it became clear that there had been something real in what I sensed. Not in every detail, but in the deeper shape of it. The decision was not aligned in the way it first appeared. And what stayed with me was not I was right. What stayed with me was I had sensed it. I had felt it. And I had overridden it because I could not yet prove it. I think you know the situation where your gut feels different. And that is the difference. Sensing is not certainty. It is not a command. It is not a verdict. It is the first glimpse of something worth paying attention to. And when I do pay attention, I do not always end up with an answer, but I do end up more honest. And that changes the whole relationship to what I feel. So let's bring this into everyday life. Most of us have been taught to trust what we can explain. If we cannot explain it, we dismiss it. If we cannot prove it, we postpone it. If we cannot find the words, we assume it is not important yet. But a lot of life happens before language. The body often notices before the mind catches up. The room changes before we name the shift. A conversation turns before anyone says the thing. Something feels off before we can say why. Do you know that? Something feels alive before we understand it. And when we ignore those early signals, we often end up disconnected from ourselves. Not because we were wrong, because we left too soon. What if your first sensing is not random? What if it is an invitation to listen more deeply? Not to turn it into certainty, just include it. Maybe the thing you sense is not asking you to be certain. Maybe it is asking you to pay attention. And that's different, because attention can be gentle. It can be curious. It can say, I do not know yet, but I want to stay with this. I cannot prove it, but I do not want to dismiss it. I may not have the full words, but something matters here. And here's the part that matters in relationships. The practice is not to make your sensing right. The practice is to offer it lightly enough that the other person stays free. That is where honesty and humility meet. That is where a conversation can open. So before we go deeper, please hold this with care. Listening to what we sense can touch tender places. If anything feels overwhelming, unsafe, or too much to hold alone, please reach out to a trusted professional or a crisis support in your country. This podcast is for reflection. It is not a replacement for mental health support. I'll add a resource in the show notes. Take care of yourself and the ones around you. Thank you. So here are 3 moments to notice this week. The first is when you dismiss yourself. Where do you catch yourself saying, I'm probably overthinking? That makes no sense. I can't explain it. I might be wrong. Just notice how quickly you move away from what you sense. The second is when your body knows something before words do. A tightening. A pull, a calm no, or a quiet yes. A feeling that something matters. You do not need to force meaning. Just stay with the signal long enough to notice it. And the third is when a conversation asks for one gentle truth, not a dramatic revelation, not a declaration, just one sentence that makes the unsaid visible. Something like, I don't know if this is true, but I sense there is something underneath this. As I listen, I notice sadness in me. Does that resonate at all? I may be wrong, but I wonder if there is a no somewhere in you. I don't have the full words yet, but something feels important about this. That is enough. One honest sentence can change the shape of a room. So let's take a moment together and pause. Bring one current situation to mind. A conversation, a decision, a relationship, or a place in your life where you sense there is something more here. And take a slow breath. Where do I sense there is something more here? And take another breath. What am I noticing before I explain it away? And take another breath. What does my body already know? Stay with that for a moment. What word, image, feeling, or quiet sentence appears? And take another breath. What changes in me when I allow this sensing to belong? And now ask yourself, what am I afraid would happen if I trusted this enough to include it? And then one more question. How could I say it gently without needing to be right? Maybe that means saying nothing yet. Maybe that means writing it down. Maybe that means bringing it into one honest conversation this week. Not as certainty, as an offering. And take one last breath. And quietly say to yourself, I do not need to know everything. I only need to pay attention to what I sense. And I can begin there. And that's the pause. So here's the question for this week. Where in your life do you already sense something, but you keep waiting for permission, proof, or perfect words? And maybe it's a yes, maybe it's a no. Maybe you sense sadness or aliveness. Maybe it's a quiet signal that has been trying to get your attention for a while. You do not always need to know. Sometimes you need to listen to what you sense. And maybe this week you don't need to silence the whisper just because it is not yet a sentence. Because sometimes the first signal is not loud. Sometimes it arrives as a whisper from your gut, your intuition. If this pause supported you, follow the podcast or share it with someone who may need a little more space to listen to what they already sense today. I see you in the next pause. I'm Jorma, and you're amazing. Take care of yourself. Bye.